Welcome to Real Life Renos, the podcast. My name is Karen Brown, and I'm an aging in place and accessibility strategist. Today, our favorite guest, Ron Wickman, returns. Ron is just back from a couple of conferences and brings us some promising news from the world of architecture. We also find out if Ron sneaks accessibility features into his designs for unsuspecting clients. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Real Life Renos, the podcast, and we are thrilled, as always, to welcome back Ron Wickman. Hi, Ron.
Hi.
I understand that since we last met, you've been to a couple of conferences that were done for and by architects. Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, so the first conference was just a couple of weeks ago in Banff. So every 2 years, the Alberta Association of Architects holds a conference called the Banff Session. So this is something that started in the 1950s and has been ongoing for all these years now. And it always the original intent of the conference was to bring architects together in one of the most beautiful places in the world, Banff, and listen to architects that are world renowned in the work that they do, and as an audience, we could get inspired uh, by these talks by architects that are doing some pretty amazing things, and hopefully take some of the lessons we've learned back to our own offices. Certainly, being in Banff and having a couple of days to mix and mingle with our peers is something that we really enjoy too. And many architects to this day, I only see every 2 years at the Banff sessions. So it's good. It's a good chance to catch up. And I personally, actually, starting in 1994. Uh, uh, I guess overall, I've helped chair 6 Banff sessions. So I did three consecutively, then took 2 off, and um, the idea of bringing in speakers that were compelling was always what drove me to help organize the Banff sessions. I do a lot of my own research and try to keep up to date with what's happening, especially around the world, with innovative designers, innovative architects. And so after a couple of sessions where um, I didn't think the speakers were bad by any stretch, but just not really talking about the subject matter that I take a personal interest in. And so I just said, could I just get slightly involved to help at least get one of the keynote speakers? And the next thing I knew, I chaired 3 more sessions. So, so, so it's something that's near and dear to my heart. I really enjoy the time and the education that you get. What happens now at these sessions is there are 4 keynote speakers, world-renowned speakers, and then there are a whole bunch of different sessions that we call continuing education. So they're a bit more modest, and talk specifically about sometimes products or issues. Of course, issues such as sustainability and green architecture are high on everybody's list today. We talk about climate change and the environment. And other than myself, accessibility was never really presented at the BAMP sessions.
Very
And
telling.
yeah, and this year I didn't do a presentation, but there was a very good continuing education presentation on accessibility. So it really was encouraging to hear another architect talking about it. Uh, a, a slightly bigger, well, a bigger firm than me. Um, that doesn't take much. You just need 2, and then you're bigger than me. But um,
Was this
uh,
architect
you know,
from Canada?
yes, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
from the Vancouver area.
Okay.
Very good architect, well known for a lot of their public buildings all across Canada, and very good architect, very good designer, and very very good discussion about their work. And he also made his way to the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada's conference that happened in Vancouver. So the weekend in Banff allowed me to drive back to Edmonton on the Sunday, and then that Monday, the next Monday, I was on a plane to Vancouver, and that week in Vancouver was the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada's Festival of Architecture that they hold every year in a different city. So this year it was in Vancouver, and that same architect did a similar presentation, a lot of the same slides, the same discussions, but also a slightly different discussion around work that he's been doing with the Rick Hansen Foundation in Vancouver. So there was a prominence of people who work with Rick Hansen and the foundation there at the conference as well. So there were there were at least four separate sessions on accessibility at the
Hmm.
RIC conference, mine being one of them.
Yours was one.
Um,
And of course, you've presented to the Rick Hansen Foundation conference in the past, and I'm a Rick Hansen Foundation professional. So
right.
that resonates with both of us for different reasons, I suppose. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and so it was very very interesting, and it really got me thinking a bit more philosophically too, I guess. Uh, all these years having kind of felt like a bit of the lone wolf, sort of yelling or screaming at everybody to, pay attention to this stuff. Now people are paying attention to it, which is really, really, really great to see. I don't think it was far away from people's minds. Architects are typically, we're trained to be creative, but generally very compassionate people that want to do good things. But we're often guided by circumstance and our clients and the business and all the rest. So sometimes it is hard to find yourself in a position where you can really focus in on issues around accessibility. But the presentations were from people that had something happen in their lives that made them uh, really rethink their attitudes and beliefs towards how they practice architecture, which I found very interesting and challenged me now to think more about the way that I present my own work and my own experiences and the kind of education that I want to provide for not only architects but people in the general public, home builders, and even politicians. What is the message that I am trying to get through to other people, knowing that there's other people out there really pushing for some change and some more work to be done in this area of accessibility.
that is really encouraging.
Hmm.
And it's always very compelling, as you certainly know better than most, when something happens in your own circle of friends or family that changes your thinking. You know that expression, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And
Yeah.
it sounds like these presenters had that kind of a change happen in their lives. Can you tell us, like, a couple of sentences on a couple of the presentations, what they were
Uh,
talking about in particular?
Yeah, yeah. So I can, because I mean that's been always at the heart of what I present is are these stories about my experiences, and thinking that other people would find those experiences and stories quite compelling and want to try to do the same sort of thing. Um, the one architect that did the two presentations, he talked about an experience where uh, he designed a recreation center, and it was at a time in his life when he had a young child, and he thought, wouldn't it, this will be so nice. I'm designing a building that myself and my child can swim together and enjoy the facility. And then sometime later, maybe 6 months, I can't remember exactly if he gave a timeline, but he got a letter or some kind of notification from a mom who said, my son can't use your recreation facility because he has a disability. And that really hit home for him. And he said, especially being that this new dad, he felt that how harmful it was for this mom not to be able to share in the same joy that he was having with his own son. So he really made a commitment to think about the way he designs his buildings to be more inclusive. And that was the word that he used more often than not, was this idea of being inclusive, which is really the mother term when we talk about issues around it. Like I often say, accessibility. And I guess just having said that, I want to make sure I say this. In my presentation, I started by saying, if you ask me if my presentation's about inclusive design, universal design, accessible design, barrier-free design, visitability, I'm going to say yes. So
To
I
all of the
just wanted
above.
to, I just wanted to get that out there, that don't come at me for not using, the right term or the wrong term. I'm it all means the same to me. We're all in this to make the world better for, as many people as we can, right? So we're trying to be, and inclusive is still in my mind the mother word, but accessibility is what I personally really focus on, and that is people with disabilities. So never far from my thoughts are people of color and other minority groups. But at the heart of my work and thoughts is people with disabilities, or are people with disabilities, and that has everything to do with the fact that I grew up around that, in that world, with my dad being in a wheelchair. So and then that's my work too. So every single
Yeah.
day of my life, I'm talking to somebody, at least one person that has a disability. That a day doesn't go by that doesn't happen for me. So
For,
it's just always there for me.
for those who may have listened to our last podcast that we did together with Robert Lipka, toward the end of the podcast, we did touch on semantics, and universal design versus accessibility was something that we did talk about. And if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, the term universal design is something that is preferred because using, in Europe perhaps, because the term accessibility makes some people feel other. Whereas
Yes.
universal design starts from the very beginning that it is for everyone. It was a really interesting conversation that I believe Robert initiated, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken,
Yeah, we
and
did.
it,
Yeah.
it certainly got me thinking.
It's true, and it's something that's not lost on me ever when I'm talking to people. And I know, for myself, there are some, I've become aware of some conferences happening around the world now, and I've submitted proposals for those conferences. And one of the problems is you're only allowed to um, say something in 300 words or less, like what you want to talk about. So I don't always get selected to do a presentation, um, but I do sometimes. So I can't say I'm a terrible writer, but I think there's an art to even writing a proposal, to make it sound compelling, right? And so there was one just recently, a conference coming up in Norway, where I usually I just hear we haven't selected, or we have selected your presentation. This one actually gave the thoughts of three jury members. So three people obviously looked at my presentation, and what really struck me, and I didn't know what to think about it. I guess I'm still scratching my head a little bit. One was, this is very compelling. We should make room for this presentation. One said, "This is nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. This is a hard no." And the other was, "It's pretty good. We should make room for him if we can." So it ended up being no. Um, but it was wow, like three different people looked at what I said, uh, but all three did say that I used the word accessibility when I should have been using the term universal. So, I can't, in 300 words, I can't sort of sum up my presentation and explain my thoughts around the terminology, right? And the words that I'm using. To me, it just means the same thing. So clearly, I wasn't able to sort of gain the attention of these the well, one jury member thought it was pretty good, I guess. So it's a really sort of funny thing, right, where um, you have the experience, but you only have this short time to kind of um, say what you want to say. So that's, presentations are very much like that, and people have, they're limited in how much time they want to like listen to somebody talk about a subject too. So the art of presenting a topic is also something that I'm aware of. And again, this architect that presented in both Banff and Vancouver did a very good job with his presentation. It was very compelling. Some videos, very good images. So it was like top notch, I think, and very well done. The other two that I wanted to mention were an interior designer. I think she was from the Quebec area, and she talked about working in healthcare and how she used to be, I guess, what you'd call a sort of uh, forgive me if I offend anybody, but a typical interior designer that focused on, colors and materials and so on, without without a lot of thought about the end user. And then she had moments in her life where I think her personal family reasons, um, she realized that her choices can make a difference, especially for people who might be experiencing dementia, Alzheimer's. And so she suddenly had a very different tone and said, we really have to pay attention to who's actually using these facilities and how to make them as comfortable as possible. So just picking pretty colors is not really the way to do it, right? I mean, that's part of it, but it's not at the heart of it. And that was the message she was trying to bring to the audience, which I thought was really good as well.
And how did the audience respond to her? Did they start thinking a little bit more?
I think so. I think so. It's really hard to say. For the most part, there isn't a lot of time for discussion. I think for a lot of architects, they do want to know more detail. They want to know, like, how do we do this? How do we actually make it happen? The message that was very clear and consistent from all of us that presented about accessibility was that, like I always say, the building code is the bare minimum. Um,
Yes,
so
the minimum that anybody has to do to
that's
not
right.
get
You're just,
sued.
yeah. The other, I liked what the other architect said. He said that the building code is the worst. So he said, if you do anything less than the building code, you're negligent as an architect and you're going to get sued. So
That's right.
you're not really doing that great if you're meeting code. It means you're just doing your job, right? And so, again, I think all of us were trying to encourage our audiences to think about the subject, much like you would think about uh, the use of materials, the use of natural daylight, the use of space, the idea of sustainability. You want to achieve something that's at a higher level than just the bare minimum. You
You'd
don't
hope.
really, yeah, you don't really want to design a box with windows. You want to design something that lifts our spirits and makes us feel, uh, makes us want, or makes us have a beautiful experience, really. So it's not just something that we just see and go, yeah, okay, I guess that's okay. It keeps the rain off me, but other than that, it's just a box with windows. Like, we all strive to do something more. Um, in the accessible design world, I think we're trying to just allow more people into our world, right? That we're designing for. So that's
It's
all
more
it's really
purposeful
about.
thinking about how the space is going to be perceived and
Yeah,
used.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And a couple of things I wanted to say too. The audiences for the accessibility talks were somewhat limited. Like, we certainly weren't keynote speakers. So, maybe 50, 70 people in the audience for us. Uh,
But the
the
good news is that there were four presentations, not just
That's right. I
one
know,
from
I know,
Ron,
I know.
right?
Yeah, but
Okay, glass half
yeah,
full, baby, glass half
yeah,
full.
that definitely the glass is half full. Yeah, yeah, you're right, you're right.
Yeah.
So make sure that my messaging doesn't come off as being negative. But I did have to say that the in Banff, the final talk in Banff was by an architect who has done some very big work in China and elsewhere in the world, stadiums and so on. But the last thing that she showed us was the new George Lucas Museum, and which is being built in Los Angeles. And it's just you just realize that that's a completely different world that um, some architects work in, right? Like I don't know what the budget is in the billions of dollars for this building, but it's just that's sort of what we get from our keynote speakers in Banff are these like architects that are doing things that only a handful of architects are doing around the world, and they're just very, very big and significant, right? So they might say I think for the most part it's such a tricky building to do in a way that beyond making it meet code, I'm not sure what they if they did do more than that, they didn't talk about it, right? Because there was just all these other things to talk about. So I always find that interesting, and I'm not saying I can't say one is better or worse than the other. I'm just saying that's not where my focus is. Like I'm happy that there are other architects and firms that do this kind of work. It's just not really sort of in my wheelhouse myself, right? But it is generally what our field tends to gravitate towards is this kind of the bigger, loftier, and that's like all arts. I think is kind of like that, right? You see the same in music and the movie industry and all the rest.
Sure,
So
you want to be
there's a lot of
bigger.
power. There's a lot of power in all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to be bigger
Um,
and do more and have the kudos for doing that. Have that on your
yeah.
resume.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
be
And then
invited to Banff, which is a very hoity-toity,
yeah.
she place to have a
Yeah.
conference.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And having been a part of that, a lot of architects, they came from Europe. That the first one I ever helped organize was, um, in fact, really it was just I was the Banff committee and then staff at the time helped me. There was no real committee. It was just me, I was pretty fresh out of school. I had just become registered, and I'm just a big fan of Scandinavian architecture. So I just said I wouldn't it be great if we had an architect from Finland and Sweden and Denmark or Norway. We had three speakers, so I had basically four countries to choose from. And I said, but is it gonna be okay that like I feel like I'm a bit of a dictator here? And the staff just said, well, you're organizing it, so you decide. And I was like, okay. And it was really good. And in fact, in a funny roundabout way, what ended up happening is very unplanned. I didn't know this until it all came together, but all three architects, it was a Finnish architect, a Danish architect, and a Norwegian architect. They had all done work together on a experimental housing project area in Sweden. And so this area, uh, they hired a Swedish architect, a Norwegian architect, Danish and Finnish architect to each design a building. So four buildings designed in this one location, all representing their countries. And so the three architects met in Sweden when they each designed their buildings, and then they met again in Banff, each to do their own lecture on the work that they do. So that was really quite nice. It was nice how that all worked out. And I was just in Denmark last year at the World Congress of Architecture, and um, still stay in touch with the architect who's since retired from Denmark. And so after all these years, we still stay in touch, and so that that part of it is really a personal it's sort of agenda item for me, is just to be able to work and talk to and stay in touch with these architects that have done some pretty amazing stuff. I wanted to mention the last talk that I went to in Vancouver at the RRC Festival, because it couldn't be more opposite of the last one I saw in Banff. And it was a group. It was a panel group there were 5 people, and they talked about work being done in a First Nations community in BC that had just been Linden, just been ravaged by fire. And the whole presentation only showed one image, which was a sort of late 60s, early 70s bi-level house that is very common, um, all over my part of the world anyway. I'm sure all of Canada. But at the time, there were like essentially 5 CMHC houses that would get built in our First Nations communities, and this was one of them. And it was like literally the biggest one, this bi-level.
You mean 5 designs, not
There were
five
five
houses.
designs,
5 designs.
five
Okay.
five designs, so you could get one of those 5
Right.
in your community, and that's all you ever got in those days. And I'm not speaking as with amazing authority on all of this, but this was like through the presentation. But that house, which amounted to about overall maybe 1,600 square feet over the 2 levels, often would house 17 or 18 people in the family. And it was built with minimal insulation and all the rest. So, they're just sort of talking about how these very foreign homes were being built in First Nation communities, and it's just got to stop, right? We got to build things that are, well, now they got to build things that are more fireproof, more sustainable, but also more part of the culture of the First Nations community. And they're different all over Canada. So there is no one size fits all across Canada for anything, any kind of housing.
If I'm not mistaken, you've been involved with First Nations communities building some accessibility features or houses, community areas for.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've started, in the last 5 or 6 years now, I've been doing some of that with some communities here in Alberta, and really trying to promote that idea and trying to uh, build homes that are uh, energy efficient, more sustainable, more of the culture, engage the people that live in the community as to what they're looking for. And in a previous podcast, we had a discussion with John Kupchenko, who just happens to be the builder in the one community. So between the two of us, we end up getting involved in a lot of this work together, and we're able to be on the same page in terms of providing and building this kind of designing and building this kind of housing that we think would be more appropriate to the circumstance. All on-grade access, wet room, bathrooms. They are actually a little bit bigger than the norm, because we understand and we've been told that there's going to be an extended family living in these homes. So we're designing them for that child that's 6 or 8, and that adult that's 88, that kind of thing. And so
What a concept.
yeah, yeah. So being able to kind of use what we're doing, um, and thinking about and actually making real real houses out of these thoughts is what I find really exciting for me as the architect, right? So they're not the new museum for George Lucas, but they're they're very much part of what we need to have done for people, right? So I think the real thing the real idea that came out for me was from these 2 conferences, was for me to really focus on what I've been doing all along, which is which is a kind of people orientated design. So uh, in my early career, I didn't just do work for people with disabilities. I did whatever came my way because I, I needed money. I needed to make a living, and pay bills and so on. And I just didn't have enough of a reputation to just, focus on just accessibility type projects. So I always felt like I was a good listener. So when my client said, I want this or that, we didn't fight. Like sometimes as the architect and designer, I could I could I could see that if we did it my way, it would look a lot better. Um, but I typically didn't push for that, because I knew that the client wanted something else. So uh, it's a bit of a, I'm not saying I did something ugly because the client wanted it. It's just, I listened to what they wanted, and we tried to find an appropriate solution that would, at the end of the day, benefit them the most, as opposed to just me being able to drive by it and go, yeah, I sure designed a nice house there, or send other potential clients to see kind of what my style is, because I've never really felt I've had a style. I just design what I think my clients really want. And so we spend a lot of time together and we talk about things. And so that whole methodology of me working that way has always been part of my work with people who have disabilities. Now, the stakes are higher when you're talking about somebody that is missing a leg and uses a wheelchair. The whole idea of how you use a shower is quite different than just being in a wheelchair. The dynamics are different, right? And trying to really understand how that all works is something that I dig really deep into with my clients, and we talk it through. And fortunately, I a lot of my work is done with the Workers' Compensation Board here in Alberta, and the work allows me to do that, right? So I mean, I do get paid to do that, um, and but it's tremendously rewarding. I guess I could make more money if I just didn't do that and just did the work kind of at a minimum. But I always feel like I go that extra mile because for myself, I want to learn and get better at my craft, because that's going to make me better for future projects. So I really was struck by this presentation in Vancouver, and it really energized me because it was so different than so many of the other presentations, which for the most part had big, high, lofty goals. This other one also had like big, lofty goals, but from a more humble standpoint, like just give us a house that makes sense, right? Like, and that's fireproof, and like some very simple things that, again, when we're in schools of architecture, I think we're often discouraged from being, practical and thinking along those lines, because we want to be the next Frank Gehry, or Norman Foster, or who's ever kind of the flavor of the day, so to speak, right? So I remember having those thoughts when I was in school, and when I first got out of school. Wouldn't it be nice to be super famous and all that? But as my work has progressed, uh, I find real satisfaction in solving these critical, uh, or finding critical solutions for people that can really benefit from my experience, in a very very specific way.
When you're designing for people who don't currently have disabilities or who are middle aged and really aren't thinking 20 years out, do you ever sneak in universal components that they don't actually recognize as accessible design or universal design, but will benefit them down the road? Do you ever do that?
Yes.
I
So
knew it. I knew
I
it.
I do. Well, let's put it this way. I always try to eliminate steps at the front door. So the main entrance door. I'll do everything I can to eliminate the steps. Um, but here's an interesting thing that is worth talking about, at least a little bit, is what we need to do is often do a sidewalk that's just not straight from the public sidewalk to the front door. Um, Because if we do that, the sidewalk's just going to be too steep if you don't have steps. So normally, we just follow the slope of the land to our front steps, and then those steps get us to the front door. Uh, so what I try to do is I say, wouldn't it be nice to do a nice front yard landscaping plan where we have a bit of a meandering sidewalk pathway that takes you through nature before you get to your house. So making it, again, sound like a very special type of way of getting into the house.
Very clever.
Um, but often it does, the resistance is often, well, isn't that just more concrete and more expense? So try to say, well, no, I don't think so. If the contractor's in the room, they go, yeah, it is. um, but even if you buy into that, then you start getting a situation where often the sidewalk, after a while, the sidewalk starts getting higher than the land. Um, and then you're into a situation where you have like a bit of a drop off, maybe, maybe not much more than a foot, but
Right.
still that's significant, right? It becomes like a tripping hazard, or if you're in a wheelchair, you can fall off that edge. And I always say, well, just feather the land up to, like, just landscape up to the sidewalk. And um, it's much more challenging to convince uh, the homeowner and even the builder to do that. It's just not what they're used to seeing or doing. And so it's really important then that I can get to do some of these projects and then say, well, here, let me show you an image of, or let me take you to a house that we've done this exact thing and it works, right?
Right.
And so that's one for sure. The second one that, again, if I could just convince our new home builders to do one thing consistently in changing the way they design their and build their houses, would be to turn the bathrooms into wet rooms. So I also make a very strong argument to do the wet room bathroom, and that usually doesn't get me into too much trouble. Most people like the idea of it. They need to be convinced that it's waterproof and water won't get into the rest of the house
So, for
and all that.
listeners who maybe don't know, haven't heard some of our previous podcasts, can you give the Coles Notes version of what a wet room
Mm.
is?
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
um, the wet room is essentially turning your bathroom into a waterproofed room. So the entire floor of the bathroom would be tiled and waterproofed underneath the tile, and same with the walls. So essentially, from the door to the drain in the shower area, there would be no curbs. So everything just slopes to the drain. So if you were to walk into the bathroom and stand in the shower, you would shower just like, I guess, any other bathroom, except, you might not have like this fiberglass shower unit that you stand in. It's just part of the bathroom. But if you were to wheel in and need to transfer from your wheelchair or even shower from your wheelchair, there is no curb that would impede your ability to be able to do that.
It's a
And
brilliant
so it's
idea.
it's yeah, and it's, again, just being in myself being in Denmark last year, that's the only way they do it. Like, the wet room is just the way they do things there.
Yeah.
They wouldn't understand why you would want a curb
It,
in a
it's
way,
the
right?
it's the way to take 50-year-old houses, 50-year-old two-story houses, for people who want to live on one floor. Maybe they've got some semblance of a bathroom, whether it's a two or three piece on the main floor. It is a way to take that bathroom and make it entirely functional for somebody to use and live on one floor of that house. It's
That's
a
right.
great idea. And
Yeah,
you say very common in Europe, very common in Asia, very
exactly.
common in a lot of places. North Americans are just very strange about our
Yeah.
bathrooms.
And it's just the history of how we've always built with wood, and we've just never quite had the waterproofing systems that really protected our floors, right? Our wood floors from that. But we do now for sure. Like, and it's been a bit of a journey and it's taken some time, but the systems are really really great. Like, they're pretty much impossible to like cut a hole in them or anything like that. So you'd have to work really hard to make them fail. So
For sure.
it is something that uh, certainly will just be part of my design. I tend not to talk about it that much, and then when if it comes up, and I usually don't let it go to the to the finished state when then they go, well, what is this? So
Right.
at some point I sort of spill it on them, but I often I'll leave it till we get the budget in, right? So if the house comes in at a budget that they're happy with, then I can say, oh yeah, by the way, we have these things that can allow you to live in this forever home too, right? So it's just so you know, and it hasn't affected your budget or your aesthetics or anything like that. So usually by that time, then they're more than happy to keep going, right?
Right.
Things like 3 foot wide doors, lever door handles, lower light switches. Those are really easy. Those like you don't even have to convince homeowners to do that anymore, right? So
You just have to
there's a lot of
convince the trades to do it.
yeah, yeah, and a lot of the trade like that 3 foot wide doors are really easy now because the demand is there. People want wider doors for moving furniture and all the rest. So that's pretty simple. The two toughest ones that would have the biggest impact on the industry are the no step entrances and the wet room bathrooms. Those two are the ones that really would be a game changer um, in the industry for sure.
They may be the ones that are hardest to convince people of, but they're the ones that absolutely make the most difference in the
Yeah.
lives
Well,
of the
yeah,
homeowners.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, sure.
Well, I'm
I,
absolutely.
I,
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. I wanted to, because I just think this is like so fascinating, and just tells you a lot about people. My mom. So my mom still lives in the house that she's lived in since 1967. My dad passed away in 2004. The house is entirely wheelchair accessible. It's got a ramp in the back that gets you from the garage to the detached garage to the back entrance of the house. The bathroom has a big wet room, shower area. Uh, the sink is open underneath. There's a second sink that was part of the original bathroom that is not open underneath. So she had a bad year last year. She broke her wrist and then she fell on her stairs going down to the basement and fractured her spine. So she's still on the mend, and then on top of all of that, her basement flooded last year too. So old house has no weeping tile, had actually no insulation in the walls in the basement. So we redid all of the basement where we have weeping tile and a sump pump now, and so the landscape got completely chewed up, and we have to redo that this year. And so the one thing that I'm doing right now is getting the contractor, which is John Kopchenko. He's got his guys working on a new sidewalk at the front, which does a bit of a zigzag. So it goes from the public sidewalk and it goes one way and then turns at an angle and comes to a landing at the top of the at the or sorry bottom of the front door threshold. So there used to be a deck with 3 steps to the door. We took the deck off. My mom didn't want it another deck anymore. She said just do a sidewalk, and now she's going to have this big landing, and then this sidewalk which will lead um, sort of away from the house to the side and then back towards the center of the house and then down to the public sidewalk. So it's not just this straight run of sidewalk to the door, because that sidewalk would just end up being way too steep for anybody to negotiate. And she keeps every day I go over there, she's staring at this and she's going, "Well, that just looks so dumb." I'm like, "Mom, you lived with a guy in a wheelchair. Like if anybody should understand this, you should, right?" And she goes, "But I'm not. I didn't break my back. I just hurt it." Just like, are
Oh,
you trying to say I'm old?" And I'm like, "Yes, Mom, you're old. You're 82. Like you're not moving as fast anymore. Like just think about it. You'll be able to go out in your walker, or if you need to use a wheelchair, which is likely what's going to happen. But not only that, friends and family in wheelchairs can come and visit, And so the last thing I thought I would have to do in my life is convince my mom to do a
No
no-step
kidding.
entrance. and, and here I am trying to do that. So even people that are converted, I guess you can say, aren't always converted. So
That's because we all want to think we're 20 years old and invincible.
I guess, but it just was, wow, that really kind of threw me for a bit of a loop. So so yeah, I guess the long and short of it is the two conferences were fantastic. Um, in some respects, the highlight for me in Vancouver was going to one of the Edmonton Vancouver games, the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I managed to snag a ticket for that and go to the game, which was a lot of fun. But it was very, very positive to be in a crowd and be able to talk about accessibility to a lot of people that really listened to the presentations that were there, and I think a lot of people left thinking, yeah, this is really important, and for whatever personal reason they have, maybe like many of us, their reasoning is because they put people first in the way they think and design, and it's very important to them. Maybe they think of it as a way to bring business into their firm, which is fine too, um, because it's all part of it, right? I think there's lots of room for more architects to be experts in this area. So I think a lot of people did go home and were thinking, we should maybe take this Recanson certification program. We should do everything we can to learn more about it and get better at it, right? Just like they would with energy efficiency and sustainability. Always trying to get better at their craft, and being able to just add this as another part of their design process. I think really for the first time that I can think of in my working career, uh, there was a real theme there, for more accessibility. So that was really significant.
That is fantastic news. To hear that even though your mother may not be thinking in terms of her own accessibility needs in the future, much less in the present, that there were four presentations and not just one from Ron Wickman, and that
Yeah,
people are thinking about this. That is incredibly positive. So
I think. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree
a
too.
great note to end the podcast. Do you have any
Yeah.
final words?
Um, no, not really. I mean, I feel like anything I say might get us another hour.
No, no, no. We're not going to do that. But I
I
will say this. This is National Accessibility Week when we are
yeah.
recording this, and your shirt says "Ramp It Up."
Oh,
The T-shirt that you're
yeah,
wearing,
yeah,
"Ramp
yeah.
It Up," which is fantastic. Here, I'll just give you camera one. Can you lean back a little bit?
Sure.
Ramp it up. There
This
we
is this
go.
is yeah. So my daughter-in-law, who's an artist, she always comes up with clever gifts to give me. So this was a few years ago, and in fact, this I was wearing this shirt when I went to the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. And for anybody that has experienced that building or knows anything about it, uh, you'll know that you basically can start at the ground level and work your way up a series of ramps that go. I think it's maybe 6 or 7 stories, and you can get to all the levels with ramps instead of stairs. I mean, there's stairs there too, and then there's an elevator. So you could also take the elevator all the way to the top and then just make your way down with the ramps. And so I thought, well, this is definitely, if I can wear it in one building, this would be the right one to wear it. And
Completely.
one of the people, staff members there, saw me and said, "That's a great shirt." And I said, "Yeah. So what do you know about this building?" And then she introduced me to the person who was instrumental in working with the architect and making sure that it had a high level of accessibility. So it kind of got me in to learn a bit more about the building itself. So, again, that was probably a little less of an agenda item for the architect, but definitely something that came from staff and the client base saying like, this is a human rights museum, so we better take this seriously, right? So it was it was well executed. I thought it was a pretty good building, as a piece of architecture, and a piece of accessible architecture. It just, again, I don't think you have to separate those two. It was just a nice building to experience.
We'll put a link to that building in our show notes, but
Hmm.
that's a great place to close the podcast on. So I will thank
Great.
you once again for joining me, Ron. And to those of you who are joining us for this podcast, I will invite you to join us again for our next episode of Real Life Renos, the podcast.